capture this. And Brenda has kindly shared about the Catalyst 2030 and a reminder to that any events or resources or things you've written or things you want us to know about, please share in the chat and we can capture it in the notes, or you can put it right in the notes. And without further ado, I'm super excited to have Louise sharing with us today about inspiring communities and all things that she feels would create a good platform for our discussion. And her and I were on a little bit early, and as always, inspiring is a great word to describe Louise, and many of you do know her, but for those who don't, you're in for quite a treat. So look forward to going on this journey with you, Louise, and over to you.
Thank you. So my name is Louise Adongo. I am the Executive Director of Inspiring Communities and also the co-chair of the Solidarity Working Group. And we can share some information about that in the chat or later for those who need to know what that is. I am joining you from Mi'kma'ki. Specifically, I'm in Dartmouth, which is Punamaquoddy, which I think is how you pronounce it. I always apologize because I'm learning how to pronounce the Mi'kmaq term for Dartmouth, which is where I am. And I have been thinking about how to locate what I'm going to talk about, where I'm going to start. First of all, for those of you who saw the deck, I asked questions right up front. I've been watching how this tends to go, and we don't get through the PowerPoint, so it's also only 13 slides. And I kind of maximized that I'm not going to talk through every slide because I really will value the conversation that we have. Thanks, Victor, for that. So I'm going to share my screen, and if I can, and attempt to put my presentation on full screen. Let's see if that will work for me. And if it doesn't, then we'll just go. Yeah, okay. So yes, my name is Louise, and to help get an understanding or sense of what we're talking about, first of all, I lived in South Africa, so Alan, super excited to hear your accent and also connect after this. I went to school in Botswana and lived in and worked in Namibia for a while, and then spent a lot of time in Johannesburg and like Mafeking in the northern part of South Africa. I started in the role in Inspiring Communities April 2021. I am one of the many BIPOC hires that happened after the George Floyd phenomenon. I think that's important to reference in the context of the conversation that we're going to have and in the context of who I am as a person. So my background is I've worked in nonprofit and government, and then dabbled in consulting for my career, and found myself in this role at Inspiring Communities after having been part of the social innovation sector for about 10 years. I actually first met, before I knew anything about any of the work that we all do, a friend of mine went to the social innovation school in Waterloo. And so I met Tim Drayman long before I knew anything about the sector existing. And we tried to put a social lab inside the provincial government. So we did some work, about 7 of us. We were public servants that were keen and eager, and we went on this whole journey. And I fell in love. These were my people. Systems changed, wicked problems. How do we do things not in silos? How do we challenge ourselves to ask deeper questions? So it's not a surprise, I guess, that I ended up in this role. And then I guess I would say, be careful what you wish for when you say that you want to work for a systems change organization, because the systems will change and the change will start with you. So just want to share a little bit about the winding journey. On this slide, what I wanted to show is what we've come to is an understanding of Inspiring Communities, which is the larger logo, really needs to be greater than the parts. And the parts right now are Turning the Tide, which is a geographic initiative in Digby, Between the Bridges, which is in Dartmouth North, but we're already in conversations about expanding that beyond where it is. And Jane, you would be happy to know that part of that includes looking at how we explore storefronts for everyone every day in our communities in HRM. We have the Northside Rising, which is in Cape Breton, and then co-located with that, we're hosting an African Nova Scotian infrastructure project where we're looking at developing connections into the construction industry for African Nova Scotians that are moving back from having worked out west. There's been a lot of reverse migration where people have moved back home, and finding access points and entry points into employment, whether it's green jobs or traditional construction jobs, is a challenge. And then we have this new emerging, and it's a seedling on purpose, called strategic initiatives, where we are really stretching ourselves and asking ourselves, if we're a systems change catalyst, if we're in transformation, if we're an intermediary, how do we make deliberate space for emergence, as opposed to just grabbing projects as they arrive? And how do you structure inside the organization to be able to do that? So I promised myself I would focus on this slide to share that. These questions, would love us to come back to them. So if you hadn't seen them before, these are the 3 questions that I want to leave with you. Is your organization an intermediary? Yes or not? How do you communicate and demonstrate the value you have to upstream or downstream or in whatever direction in the system? And then how are you grappling with what is impact, and what does impact mean at different levels? That has been part of our journey. So some of this information is available online, so I'm just going to breeze right through it. But what I will say on this slide is where we started and how we're going is not the same. And a large part of that, which I'll reference later when we talk about our ANSAZU, is, does it matter? Does it matter how you started and where your funding came from? Because for us, where we started and where our funding came from is the provincial government, Nova Scotia government, funded Inspiring Communities to do collective impact work in 3 communities in Nova Scotia. We are now not there. We are now in a different place, but we have not let go of the collective impact part of our work. And then just to say, because this gets confused all the time, we are aware that there is an Inspiring Communities New Zealand. Actually, when I was applying for this role, I asked specifically, are we affiliated with them? And I was told no. And then I've reached out to them. And so now they know that there's an Inspiring Communities Nova Scotia that is trying to do some of what they're doing. But Inspiring Communities New Zealand is much older than us. They fondly refer to us as our older sister. They've been in existence for, I believe, it's over 10 years, might be close to 15 even. And they've been very generous with us about where we are on our journey, and that they have navigated exactly what we're navigating. And we're inspired by Inspiring Communities New Zealand because they've done a lot of work around reconciliation and how to include and embrace and introduce and center their work around Maori language and Maori ways of knowing and Maori experiences. I belabor that point because I think for any of you who don't know anything about Inspiring Communities in New Zealand, they're worth looking up. Their practices are really worth looking at. So this is a new slide that wasn't in before, and I thought that it'd be helpful, is that when I joined in April 2021, the organization had been a startup for a while and was really needing to figure out its identity. And the people in the organization and the provincial funders, really everyone was just kind of asking, who are you and what do you do and how do you explain that to yourselves and to us who are on the outside? And in the meantime, COVID had started and was happening and was impacting programming everywhere. There was really, what is a learning organization? What does that mean? How do you take the learning in each community and spread it across the organization? And how do you communicate it as knowledge products outside of the organization? What does it mean? In the context of COVID, we experienced in very real ways what turned into the Freedom Convoy in our communities. What does that mean for how you structure programming if you're centering equity and inclusion in your work? Are you going to have vaccine mandates or not? There were just a lot of questions where we are a systems change organization that we never really thought we would be grappling with right inside our organization that we were, in a way that I emphasize that because I think it's, in a way, I have a lot of friends in the nonprofit sector who are direct deliverers of services. They were not grappling this with the way we were, because for them, if they were like daycare or providing senior care, then it's very clear. We need a vaccine mandate because we have to make our beneficiaries safe. Not as black and white for us, because we were not providing life or death services, and therefore really forced at the organization level, at the community level, at our board level with some of our funders, some really tough conversations. And also useful as identity shaping and identity forming of who are we really and do we really mean it? And so therefore, what are the decisions we're going to make about what we do? Faced a lot of requests. I've already covered that. Who are you? What do you do? What have you been doing for the last 5 years? What is the difference it's making? Why should we continue to fund you? And then what is our structure with programs in 3 geographies in Nova Scotia with an Atlantic presence, with a link to a national network of Social Innovation Canada, just really how do we move from an amorphous beast to something that understands itself and therefore can communicate that to others? Was a huge part of the journey that I was on. What happened? My screen froze. Oh, sorry about that. So the good news is we got really clear finally, and we've released all this information publicly. So we have our strategic directions. We're clear about who we are now. We're a nonprofit based in Nova Scotia. We're building collaborative relationships for change. We're based in Nova Scotia. We do our work in Atlantic Canada. We're connected to SI Canada. We want to center equity in our work, and we want to work in a way that really pushes all our partners and who we work with to understand that the systems as they currently exist are not serving the needs of the people in the communities we work in. And so we're very intentional about putting that up front, and the 5 principles we now work from, we use that to guide all our partnerships and all our relationships. So for example, when we say we want honoraria in all of our programming and all of our funding applications, we're very upfront about that because we have equitable remuneration, because we believe in mutually reinforcing mutual benefits, and we believe that participants in our programming should have value for our participation beyond participating in our programming, etc. Having that through line and that narrative, Lori will remember, because I was talking to her when we were still in the muddy parts of this, is that it's really, that story was really important, and clarifying that story was very useful inside the organization as much as it was outside the organization. People were struggling with the transition from who we were to who we are now because that story wasn't very clearly being told. So I'm going to skip this and go to this slide. So I put this in here because when I started in this organization, I came in with this metaphor about, oh, we just have to decide that we're a butterfly, and we're sort of a butterfly in terms of transformation. Parts of our work is very clear, and the part that is connected to residents and community, but the system part and the part of whether we are a single organization or 4 separate entities is not so clear. And so I really felt that my leadership style and my leadership story was going to be about how to get us to think of ourselves as a fully formed butterfly so that we could fly and so that we could move from parts to a whole. But what actually happened through the process of transformation is the metaphor that became more useful and resonated with us as an organization, and that we worked from when we had our staff retreat, was that we were really focusing on orchards and nurturing even generations beyond the life cycle of a single entity of a butterfly. It was, how do you, I think we talked about 100-year orchards. How do you move from focusing on individuals, which I think is very much this caterpillar to butterfly, to whole communities? And it became a theme of ours in terms of how we see our work, which I'll go into next. And the other key focus of our areas that I just put in there as well, for those who hadn't seen this slide before, is, so we have our primary work that we do that is place-based, and then we have some theme-based work that we do. And then because we are part of networks, we are grappling with how we continue to maintain our networked work and distributed leadership through that, even though structurally we are in Nova Scotia, we're registered here. From a legal perspective, our legal entity is in Nova Scotia, but we understand and see the benefits of the way in which we're structured and the work that we can do in a distributed way. So that is something that we continue to think about. And then evaluation and developmental evaluation as a learning organization, sharing what we learn as we go is really important for us. But with centering equity in our work, we know that there is a gap of who is collecting what stories in what contexts. And so building up a network of Indigenous and Black emerging evaluators who can then do the measuring and be part of our DE communities of practice and gather for us that evidence of what is success and what is impact is really important to us from a systems change perspective, because that is part of what we want to change in that part of the system, is who is gathering what information for what purposes and determining what success is. So just to talk about what we're learning from and to, as we said, we've moved from capacity building of individuals, from just purely saying consensus decision-making without an equity lens to it, with determining that self-sufficiency is about how we fund and structure each of the geographical sites, and being a loose connection of entities to a single organization called Inspiring Communities, recognizing that self-sufficiency and agency in the communities is not about us as a backbone, but about the supports that we leave behind in terms of nurturing, putting an equity lens on consensus decision-making, because without the equity and the examination of power dynamics, even in consensus, we didn't understand that consensus wasn't consensus. And then this piece about base building, that it's not just about individual supports to individual residents in the communities, but really that we want to, how we will know we are successful is when we start to see residents in the communities we work in, whether they're place-based or theme-based, think as whole communities, think more collectively, because we've experienced a lot of fragmentation in the work that we've done. And a lot of the journey in trust building and social cohesion has been to get people to understand and see that there are more perspectives than the one that they hold on their own, even on a particular problem such as substance use. Brenda, I put this in here because I shared this with the manager level in my organization, and we had like an hour-and-a-half conversation just on this visual. So Brenda had presented a few weeks ago, I believe it was in August, and this, even before her presentation, she shared this with us, and this image resonated for me the most, because I would say in some ways this is the journey that Inspiring Communities has gone through. We spent a lot of our time on the collective impact on the blue, and we sort of see ourselves as transitioning between the blue and the yellow or the gold. But the conversation we had as an organization, which kind of mirrored the conversation we had in this group when you presented, Brenda, was it's really not about this continuum from the green to the orange to the blue to the gold. It's a transformation where you don't necessarily have the pieces below in order to get to the gold. It's literally a multicolored shape that has all those pieces going on in it at the same time. That was, if I did the TLDR version of that conversation, there was really a skepticism and saying in real time in our experiences, there wasn't this natural progression of first you had this, then you had this, then you had this. You kind of had this messiness of all of those things were going on at the same time, and a systems convener needed to pull out the magic from all of that happening at the same time. And what do we do with that? And so that's some of what we're learning, and that is some of what we are hoping to step into, and how we see ourselves as an intermediary that is going to be doing some catalysis where we help to iterate, we help to shape and iterate something, and then we find out where it should live that is not with us. To give a very specific example, in Digby, we are hosting a youth outreach worker. We do not really do that youth outreach work, but it was hosted with our organization because there wasn't an entity in Digby that could take it on. So we are, with that role, working with all the youth serving organizations to say, what would it look like for this role to live either in a coalition of you or in another organization that is better suited for this work. So we are choosing how we say yes and no to opportunities, and recognizing that when we say yes, it's not a yes forever. It's yes until we have built enough of the community base to transition this out. So questions we still hold. So I think it was Michelle that shared this research piece that's being done by, I think the person's name there is also Michelle, if I'm not mistaken, from a lab in the Basque region in Europe. And it was, for me, very fascinating, because I started in April 2021. I went through up until the end of summer 2021, kind of inside the organization saying, hey, we need to do things differently. Let's gather the data to find out what different could look like. I went from July 2021 to April 2022, experiencing the heat of how wrong I was and how everything was just fine. And then Michelle shared this, and I found in the Basque region, a whole fresh set of people grappling with the exact same limitations in our structure that I was finding. And I really had wished that I had seen this or that it had been written before, because then I would have just shared it inside my organization, because we all know, but that's not how change happens. So I don't think it would have worked. But needless to say, it was just really refreshing and validating and valuable to hear every talking point that I had heard inside the organization being reflected by this lab, and has me, the reason it's a question I still hold is I'm like, so what do we do with that? So in our organization, we had debates about community-led, community-driven, on the ground, whose voice matters, who should be on the board, is governance top-down or bottom-up, are we a horizontal organization, whose values matter, what is the business model that makes sense, who should fund us, should funders hold power? It just all these fascinating questions, and many of them are reproduced in this research, which I think so far they've shared 2 or 4 blogs. I'm not sure when the rest of them are going to come out. We did make contact with them and say that we want to be either participants in their research, or when they do, I think they're going to do a gathering, some sort of a conference from people from around the world. And they said they had a smaller group that was just the people that they researched, but they had so much interest. There's so many people like me who reached out to them that they're actually planning for a virtual gathering for everybody else from around the world who just kind of like said, oh my gosh, thank you for doing this. And so the other question I guess that we're holding separate from that is, what does evaluation look like in our context? So we have used developmental evaluation, and it was primarily done with embedded evaluators in each of our geographies. And as we acquired projects that were not geography based, then we identified a developmental evaluation process for those. But I will speak for myself, I won't speak for my team members. I am not convinced that we are where we should be in terms of our evaluation, because our context is really complex, and the developmental evaluation tools that we're using, while they make sense for parts of our context, might not make sense for other parts of our context. And the data that we have gathered so far is still very fragmented. We've not come to, because that data was based on seeing us as 4 entities. We are currently in the process of looking what does it look like to design an evaluation framework that captures all of the complexity of what Inspiring Communities does to communicate what we are learning, and therefore implementing in real time and iterating about at a systems level. And what does impact look like, and why is it okay that impact in Digby is not impact in Dartmouth, is not impact in Cape Breton, is not impact in our belonging work, but is still impactful from our larger vision for equitable, thriving communities. So what are the ways in which we measure that? And then for me, a curiosity I hold is one of the biggest lessons we learned in our journey, where we even had to deal with funding crunch and restructuring, was the nonprofit sector, I'll say phenomenon, because I don't know, artifact, legacy of where you can't talk about operations and overhead, really is a disservice to organizations like ours, where so much of the work is that operations and overhead. So we are being very deliberate about making that a 4th priority of ours. Like, we've got connected communities, system partnerships, measuring impact, but we like strong core, because we want to talk about why a strong core is important, and why funding a strong core is important, because you can't actually do any of the other things without that. I think this is a conversation happening sector-wide, probably started before me, probably going to continue after me. But what does that look like from an evaluation and learning perspective, when if it's not considered part of what you evaluate and learn about and learn from? Just put this in here in case those who are interested, around some of what they talked about at the lab, and put the yellow starry shaped things for what matters for us. This is the piece where it talks about what is community-led, what defines it, what are the parameters, what is the definition of transformation. So that's a huge one for us. What is systems change and what is transformation? Who gets to call it that? Who gets to decide that something is transformational or not? I'm going to leave the collaborative governance piece on its own. Hopefully somebody will come to present to our group that can speak just to that. what I will say is where we've experimented with collaborative governance in our work is a group. So the Cape Breton team felt that the structure of the organization, where there was them and me as an ED and our board and the funders, that was moving decision-making really far from them. So they've created a collaborative governance model where they're bringing the groups of people who they think are decision makers closer to them. Part of that was to address that on the government partner perspective, the person kept changing. So we've got the model in place, but we haven't actually addressed the original problem because we have still continued to experience the change in the partner. I will fully disclose that I am not sure if the shift in governance model is about people or process, because I wonder if we just accommodated for the fact that people were changing and managed that problem in a different way, then we wouldn't need the collaborative governance model in the way that it is. I don't know. I just have questions and not answers. But I just put this in here for anybody that had further questions. The other thing I wanted to say before we go into the question and answer, and if there's anything in the chat, yeah, you can see that, and it's going to be in the notes later, is for me, the collaborative governance model, the conversations on governance, they don't really get into equity and sovereignty. So I'm curious about when we talk about shifting governance and shifting how governance currently works, where the space is in those conversations for whose governance in what context at what time. And I would have said just equity alone, but yesterday I was in a meeting, actually, Jane, they're going to follow up with you for a McConnell grant around the climate. There's a climate and equity call. And in the conversation, it was the main applicant, and they invited a whole bunch of equity deserving group leaders or entities to this conversation so we could co-write the grant. And somebody from the group was from the Assembly of First Nations, the Atlantic Canadian representative, and they said for them, it's really not about climate and equity. The conversation gets into sovereignty, not just data sovereignty, but sovereignty itself. And it really made me want to bring to this group as a footnote, I guess, is when we talk about collaborative governance, foundationally, what, like, are we still in a colonized place, I guess is the question that I would ask. So that was my presentation. I really am looking forward to discussing. I want to tell you that the organization is in a really good place. The people that are working here, some of them who've worked here from the beginning, love the work that we do, love the way we're talking about our work. Two of them who work in very different parts of the province said for the first time they actually can explain what they do to members of their family, and it feels so good. And to say this is a really timely discussion we're having. We are not sure what the recession is going to mean for us and our work and for intermediaries. And when I asked those questions at the front, I didn't realize that I was going to be saying this, but I'm really curious what COVID, post-COVID, things like in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and parts of Quebec, we're dealing with Hurricane Fiona, what the crises of our times are showing us about the roles of intermediaries and whether or not we can help to accelerate the changes that are needed. So I'm going to read the chat and open it up to anybody who wants to comment before I start addressing your questions.
Beautiful. Thank you, Louise. Thank you very much for, sharing a bit of the background, but as well some provocative questions and ideas. I don't know if there were questions in the group or more just, kind of interacting with what you shared, but take a peek and we'll start off with Brenda and then we can come back to the chat if that works for you.
Well, Louise, I just want to congratulate you and thank you because it's so exciting to find that there's other people on this same very complicated journey. So I'm just happy to connect with you. And I just want to share something around evaluation that we learned the hard way. And I think we had the same struggles that you did in terms of, how do you prove that you're making a difference when you are a catalyst for transformative change? how do you measure that? And what we learned is that in our case, what it came down to was that we were building capacity for individual leaders, as well as building capacity for organizations. So we're measuring a lot the individual, because we can't take credit for what, we're supporting and serving others. We can't take credit for what they are doing. That's why the evaluation was so challenging for us. But what we could take credit for is building their leadership capacity and the organizational capacity. So we have 2 tools that we've developed that I'd be happy to share. And I think the individual leadership one was really powerful with our funders, because we used it on a pre and post basis. We had people evaluate their own capacity as leaders before we started, and then a couple of times further down the road. So we had quantitative data that we could share with funders. And then of course we collected qualitative data in the form of stories. So I don't know if that will help, but if I can, even if you just want to use those tools as a jumping off point, let me know.
Louise, do you want to respond to that, or more take that as a
yeah, thank you. Yeah, we will look at all the tools that you have. I can tell you that we have no shortage of storytelling and qualitative data. The challenge is that I find is what level of storytelling for what level of impact, and how do you integrate it all? We're just about to release, we compiled a summary of all the data that we've ever collected, all the evaluation tool pieces from every single part of our organization, and we're going to do an analysis of it. It's currently 40 pages, so hopefully by the time we release it, it's not 40 pages. And it kind of sets us up for when we release our new theory of change. And we're also participating in InnoWeave's strategic clarity and impact cohort right now, where we're going to do tests and validate or adjust what we've developed. But I don't know. When I was speaking to our coach from InnoWeave, they were like, you're in new territory. Even we are going to be learning together some of what you're saying, because some of what you're saying truly, it's the level of complexity that we are welcoming ourselves to step into is going to require even new ways to configure old tools, which, sounds like magic to my ears, because that's
I think the stories are really powerful. And I still think funders like this. They like qualitative data. So, if we were able to say, everyone that we worked with, we were in one case we were working with Indigenous youth, and we were able to prove that each one of them, we had moved the needle on every competency for each participant in our initiative. And so funders were really happy with that. But I think,
I think Brenda,
powerful stories were better.
So I think, Brenda, some of the struggle for that is, and I'm going to try to say this as respectfully as I can, some of our organization, they don't actually care about the competency that was moved. For some of them, their measure of success was the confidence that the person built by participating in that program, which may have not been the reason the program existed, but emerged from the participation in the program as much more meaningful and powerful because it gave them access and agency in other parts of their lives. So that's part of the complexity, is it's not a linear thing where you said you were going to do this thing and you're able to do it. It's pretty non-linear because there's people who participated, dropped out, and came back. Like, I'm thinking of our Not Psych Changemakers program as an example. For some people, it's a 12-week program. At the end of it, you get a grant to go and do your idea. People drop out at every stage of that, but every single one of them considers themselves a change maker, because for them, the first change was even being able to fill out the application to apply to come to the cohort. The level of belief in themselves to even do that just created so much agency for them in other parts of their lives that we may not measure. And so that's part of what, that's part of the difficulty. And I guess the hope I would say is we're attracting different funders who understand that, because the funders who need the bums in seats, this might not be for them. This might be a different process than what they want. I hope we get to a point where there's funders that all the funders understand that if you're in a place of systems transformation where you're talking about inclusion for groups that have been traditionally not included, then your metrics have to change. So as an example from not being something that is not about inspiring communities, I worked in government and we gave funding for people to go to retrain in school. At that time, we just paid tuition. We didn't pay for the steel-toed boots. That is completely not understanding the context of the person, because for some people, if you're not paying for the steel-toed boots or if you're not paying for childcare, then they cannot go to school. So that's, I guess, some of where we're struggling is if you linearly want to say, how many people did you say were going to graduate from this course, when the barriers to even participating in the course, you wouldn't have known to apply for funding for. Telling that broader story is some of what we are looking at. And the good news is there are funders out there who that's what they want to hear, is they want to hear that broader story in addition to the course that they participated in.
Great, what a dialogue. Other reflections, questions? What was, maybe what resonated with folks, or what do you, what further would you want to know from Louise and her team? Tamara.
Yeah, I was just sort of riffing off what you were just saying, Louise, and I like the idea of confidence, and I think in a couple of different programs that I've been involved in, we've tried to measure like confidence, and I think that for me, it's what's been interesting is to measure the confidence in yourself, and then confidence also like in your network, in your supporters. Like if I were to make a request of my network, would someone be able to support me in that? And so we've built that in a couple of different ways, which if it was helpful at all, I would be happy to have a separate call with you. But I also ran a fellowship network, and that in that case, we were sort of intermediaries, but intermediaries in terms of like building relationships between people. And so we measured the strength of relationships, and we actually mapped it in terms of like a pre and post of strength of relationships, and what would be your confidence that if you asked a person, and we measured it in sort of the size of the ask. If I asked something of you that might take 30 seconds, would I have confidence that you would be able to do it? And then we sort of, made a graduated metric on that. If I asked something of you that required you to sort of vouch for me as an individual, then, would you have confidence in that? And so that was a really interesting way to pick apart. It was like a little bit tricky to work with the data and present it in a way that was communicable to folks who weren't deeply engaged with it, but it was quite an interesting little experiment. And I'd be happy to, I don't have much that I could show anymore because this was a couple of years back, but if it was helpful to chat throughout, happy to share what we learned there.
Cool. Louise, do you want to respond at all, or
yeah, I responded in the chat in terms of like, so what we're talking about next steps. So evaluation ? Research ? We're working through fellowships. We want to do some social network analysis in our communities, really just a lot of what you've said, and wanting to shift our focus from individuals to relationships and communities, and which makes sense because we've declared that we're a systems change organization, and in systems you're measuring, you know what I'm saying? So absolutely we'll follow up, and I don't want to keep chatting because Andrea's got her hand up.
Okay, Andrea.
Thanks. It's actually a question. I'm really curious about that question you posed in this sort of post-COVID, but increasingly disruptive and unstable time. What do you think is the role for the intermediaries, and how do you think, there's a sustainable model for them? Like, have you had some gleanings around this? Yeah.
I'm gonna phone one of my 15 friends, because you and I don't know. So anyone of the 14 who has an answer.
Yeah. I mean, I have opinions, but I'm really curious to hear about, I think, but I'd love to hear everyone else's opinions of it, because this is a very smart group. If anyone has the answer, it's us.
Do you want to kick us off, Andrea, with like one or two kind of reflections on it?
I mean, I think that there's an emerging, the structure of an organization that whose actual mission and vision and purpose is to be a conduit for the benefit of the communities and the networks it's serving, is, rather than for itself, is actually quite powerful, right? Because it can be responsive. As a sort of an intermediary, you are a pathway. If you can do it properly, if you're a trusted intermediary, you can be a pathway through to those who are in increasingly disruptive times, need to make good decisions quickly for the benefit of the public good. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's actually going to be an increasing role, especially as our democracy, our democratic system sort of slowly erodes before our eyes. But when things can't fit into a process, the sort of the current structures, where we can't get information about what to actually do, if the intermediary can somehow facilitate the communication of information from communities, that might be really needed and really powerful. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know who's going to pay for it, but that's what I'm thinking. That's sort of one hypothesis.
Sure. Melanie, do you want to share?
Yeah, I really liked this question as well, Louise. Many things that you said tackled lots of questions for me, and I'd be happy to chat, because we're also an intermediary organization and we're struggling or just dealing with those many of those questions around evaluation and our role as intermediary. So if opinions are allowed, maybe there are two things that I think are really really interesting in what are our role. And the first one might be obvious, but I think that working on the barriers to innovation in community, do we have resources, talents, like intermediary organizations? What are the resources, talents, networks that can catalyze reducing the barriers to community innovation, for example? This is how I see our role. This is one way of seeing it. But for me, a bit more importantly is, how can we work together, the intermediary organizations, to align, not necessarily to go everyone in the same way, but a little bit to do 1 + 1 mean 3, in terms of practice, in terms of learning exchange, in order to go faster and further. So yeah, this is where I am, but this is just a very small part of a reflection that I think we could have collectively, that I would love to be part of. And I'm curious to hear you, Louise, about that.
Yeah, Louise, do you want to share? And then, yeah, this question seems to have some resonance for folks. So Taryn and I met ahead of time and wondered what are some juicy questions we could unpack together. So Louise, let's hear you unpack a wee bit.
I genuinely don't have any thoughts or opinions or answers. What I've heard so far makes sense. What my observation is, the explaining that in a way that is simple to communicate for the 1 + 1 = 2 is important, because I agree that the value of it is that nimbleness, that responsiveness, that trusted. I like what you said, Andrea, about the trusted, because the earning of the trust that journey that intermediaries have already taken, it's really beneficial to everybody in all the streams. Like some of the information that we can communicate across our various networks, because we've got the scars tissue from forming those relationships, is not to be underestimated. And my concern is how the snapback happens, and the gains that have been made in this time that we didn't have a recession, in not understanding the role of and purpose of the sector. This would be the easiest place to take away the funding to provide it in direct services. So that's what I'm saying. I genuinely don't have, this is a place that I would love generative discussion on what the possibilities are, because when I think about it, I think about some of the pushback, for example, in what was it that the charity model asked for, increasing the funds that foundations can distribute, et cetera, which I think is how we would pay for some of this, Andrea. But the resistance to that kind of was a signal of, because that resistance came even before a recession. So in the context of a recession, it's like, what is the conversation? What is the lobby? It's, I know I have more questions and concerns than answers, but like as an example, disbursement quarter, thanks, Victor. So we're in a place where we're even saying, you know, like social finance dollars and all the dollars that the feds have promised, in a context where there might be a political shift, what happens to all of that? How do we, in a party neutral way, talk about this work? Sorry, mostly I just have sub bullet points of other questions.
Okay.
So for those who are, if you have to hop off, please feel free to go. We sometimes stay a little bit after for another 10, 15 minutes, if that's where the conversation is going. Alan, wonderful to have you here. And you hopefully sensed from all of us that we're, as you walk the path of being 2 weeks here in Toronto, not here, I guess, and where I am. If there's anything we can do for you to let us know. We'll continue the conversation for those who can stay. Maybe if somebody can capture, I see Taryn, you might have already got this, but if what we were suggesting, Taryn and I, that because we have people lined up right from now till December, that if there's like side conversations that somebody wants to spark and put out to people, to invite people to have a further dialogue to go a little bit deeper. And I'm happy to help coordinate that if it's helpful, or you can just put, a time out that you're free if you're bringing the question forward, and we can have a, go deeper sometimes on a topic. Alan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, for some reason I can't find my hand. I mean, these hands I can find.
Okay, that's perfect. We can work with that.
Louise has spoken my mind. Thank you. Yes, I mean, I could have done with your help a month ago when someone could have told me how expensive housing in Toronto is, but that's all sorted now. Thank you so much, Louise. I really appreciate your input, and it's strange because coming from the South African context, I come when I listen to the conversations and I hear us grappling with some of the same issues. So and one thing that's, I guess, sparked a thought in my mind is when you pose the question, what is community-led? I get scared when I hear these terms, community-led. It makes me think of conversations I had when people say, yes, we do youth-led work. Of course, we do youth-led work, but the framework in which the work is put forward to the youth is determined by someone else. And yet we speak about youth work, and it somehow latches on to the earlier conversation about what do the funders want? What do the funders want to see? And then do we have to change our hearts and our values to suit, those particular funders? I almost feel that some sort of reform is required from the funder side, but I'm happy to hear that you found funders that see it differently, and that's not easy to come by. I'm keen to know what the challenge is, why there is a question posed, what is community-led? And as I said, I think about some of the projects I had where we work in poor communities, where we work in communities that is riddled with gang violence and other sorts of violence. And yet when it comes to the community members themselves, they are not in the forefront of identifying the challenges. They are not in the forefront of identifying not only the challenges, but therefore what are the solutions. And within these communities, you are still find that it's very fragmented, but yet we continue to speak about community-led when in its true form or understanding, it is not. So I guess the question is, are we grappling with the same sort of things? Why is there a need to ask that question? What is community-led, and does it happen in the true sense of its understanding in the context of your work? And if not, why? I hope that makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense, and you've kind of answered your own question a little bit. So how we have faced it inside Inspiring Communities is some funders only want to fund first voice lived experience work, which sounds really great on the surface of it. And then you write the proposal, and then all of a sudden there's all these parameters and strictures and fixtures. And then in the communities, because of that fragmentation, first of all, there's never just one community. So it's like, how do you grapple with multiple perspectives inside a community? In Northside Rising, which is one of our initiatives in Cape Breton specifically, Alan, I feel like this would resonate with what you just said. So we started from being funded by government, and the public health crisis that was in Cape Breton at the time was substance use. So even though there was data from all over the community on what to focus on, because the provincial government was the funder, the focus was, which all of this is valid, like there's nobody is wrong in this, right? It was clearly a public health crisis, so they chose substance use. What happened in the context of that community is only the people who were most impacted or most engaged in that as an issue focused around the problem. So was it community led? Yes. Was it community voice? Yes. Was it inclusive, distributed? Was it about base building? And even though the staff worked on that for 4 or 5 years, they realized that not only were they getting burnt out, and it was people were getting re-traumatized and wasn't achieving what they saw as success and impact. And so they actually worked with the broader community to go further upstream. Is we all agree this is an issue, yes, but this is not everybody's issue. What can we talk about that is more inclusive and brings more members of the community, that more community voices can get around? And so now they've created a safe spaces framework and a safe spaces model. And because then the safe spaces apply to multiple people and everyone can get around, I think the mission statement around that is every Cape Bretoner deserves a safe space to be. I will tell you that we're having conversations where Black and Indigenous people are saying safe spaces is not enough. We need brave spaces, or we need Black spaces, because safety in the context of whiteness is not safety for Black and Indigenous people. So those conversations are still happening, and the provocation and the polarization is there. But I would say that that's part of why I'm really glad to work in a place like Inspiring Communities, is because we want to make it a place that you can have those conversations and work through it, as opposed to everybody retreat to their corner. Because the problems that we have, it's not about alignment in terms of all of us agreeing to the one thing. It's us really grappling with what makes sense and what can we agree to in this thing, even while we still hold our agency and identity in the rest of the place. So hopefully that was as big as an answer as you needed. And in the Arantxa Zoo Lab information that is in the deck, they say that every actor in the system has their decision on what community-led means and the power that comes with how they conceive of that. So to let the funders a little off the hook, or to spread it. So the funders have that perspective, the community members have that perspective, the staff in the organization have that perspective. And depending on how you define it, it impacts how you do the work. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Catherine, you would want to share something.
Yeah, thank you, Louise, for that wonderful presentation and for the generative thinking. Somebody said something to me that's really stayed with me. And it's that systems are not dysfunctional. They are perfectly functional for the results that they get. And just that kind of that flipping everything on the frame of everything is working perfectly for the precise outcomes that the system has. And I am, and it might just be the day I'm having, I am curious, I'll put it there. As long as there's a funder and a recipient, the funder holds the power. Because they have the money, whoever plays the instrument calls the tune. And my curiosity is, if I had a magic wand, instead of the equity seeking groups or the causes or the issues that are needing to, lobby funders, because there are as many private foundations in Canada as there are social service agencies, by the way. But it's this dance that keeps the money feeling good about itself, and it works perfectly. So why change? Right? Because it's getting the perfect outcomes for the stratas that are there. And if I can create a private foundation, I get a large tax benefit, and I can feel great about myself all day long, because for every person I fund, there's 100 who want to talk to me. It's like it's an ego boost. It's a power reinforcer. It's all of those pieces. And I'm curious about why funders in a system that works just actually perfectly, to get the outcomes that it has, and can there be actual real systems change if the resourcing sits with the funders, right? Is there a way to, and I love the Patagonia example of an entrepreneur, never wanted to run a business per se, was really interested in doing something, happened to have a good company, and all of those resources are going to the work. And I'm increasingly convinced that what we need are people who are very, very accomplished at creating successful businesses, multi-million-dollar profitability businesses, getting on the ground floor, attracting those people and having the intentionality of those businesses that they will exist with their profits being tagged to transformative systems change work. Because I don't know how the system can fund the system. Fund systems change, or what the motivation could possibly be to do that.
I mean, I want to give
Victor optimistic, but that's my moment.
Yeah. I would love for Victor to weigh in because you've said a lot of different things, and maybe Michelle, and if nobody else wants to talk, because so me, then Victor, then Michelle, and then maybe we can close. So you've said so many fascinating things there. And the reason I want Victor to speak is we just had our solidarity working group meeting. So we're doing this exploration of social finance, and we did the past, and we did the present, and we're going to do the future. And actually, before we do the future, we're going to, Peter Frampton, who's my fellow co-chair, had this wonderful recommendation that we really need to do a session with Indigenous peoples, where we really talk through why did we buy into the lie that capitalism is all there is. And before Victor, hopefully I'm like queuing you up to talk, so go off mute to let me know that you're ready. Because part of it, Catherine, is those successful business people, those successful billionaires who are going to come and help us, we have to actually examine how they were successful, and they were extractive and exploitative is how they ended up.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about not taking billionaires' money because they're extractive. I'm talking about tapping into the entrepreneurial capacity of the community, so we start generating money for ourselves and not having to go cap in hand to anybody, right? Like that's the
and
that's what I'm talking about. Not that the billions, the people who have exploited labor and capital, whatever, that they're going to save us. Like, I'm not talking billionaire philanthropy. I'm talking about people on the ground. Like I was inspired by Ryan in the African Caribbean Business Network, where he's lining up entrepreneurs who are actually going to generate resources for social issues, because they know how to do that. The communities, I mean, that's their jam. Entrepreneurs make something out of nothing, and they make money to do it. And I just feel like if we had a constellation of being able to generate the resources for ourselves,
Yeah.
it would move
Yeah.
us along at a much greater velocity.
So Victor just put a love heart, which means you hit on what he was going to say. And that is some of what we talked about in the Solidarity Working Group of the present day, was just really saying everything about the current system is broken. We need to be in the place of exploring other systems. But the part of me that understands hospicing knows that this, until those actually are developed enough to be stable, this is all we have. So yes, accelerating the pace at which we test and iterate and stabilize the systems we had before capitalism is a path to go, and is a conversation that we had in the Solidarity Working Group, and hopefully we will see coming to the fore more and more as people are questioning and challenging even the way in which impact investing is currently structured. And that's, I guess, all I would say in terms of that. I don't disagree with you, and these are conversations that are happening in contexts outside of this one, such as they happen at the Solidarity Working Group. And I just will pass it back to Michelle so we can close.
Yes, thank you. Well, Victor, I know you're not feeling well, so maybe your emojis or how you're sharing, but feel free to put, to share to share in the chat if you feel up to it. So yeah, just I guess to close us, an invitation once again for people to, one, you're welcome to facilitate on one of the upcoming groups. We're going to be doing a bit of switcheroo. Jane Ingalls let me know she's going to be in the UK, so I'm checking with others around figuring out where we go next. If that's not possible, we could bring this question, like a few of these questions, forward for further dialogue. So I'll follow up with you, Louise, if that's the case. And then others, if you would like to share in this forum, let us know if you want to bring a question. You don't have to have a presentation. You can just be bringing a dialogue. And much gratitude, Louise, for you sparked a lot of incredible conversation, and this was fabulous. So I'm going to give you my heart emoji, and thank you all for the interactive dialogue, and I look forward to gathering again and for some further sense making. So I will stay on in case there's any other questions or comments. Liberation, reparations times reconciliation equals sovereignty. There's Victor. What a beautiful closing. Beautiful. Thank you.
Michelle, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Oh, I was going to stay on with you, but I can leave and you two can chat.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'll just, I got to
maybe
stop the recording. Let me stop the recording.